Okay, good evening, everybody. We are going to call the meeting to order. I do not have minutes from the last meeting, so we're going to get right into the meat of our meeting today. We have a presentation from Northwest Vernacular on our reconnaissance level survey, as well as additional input from Carol Palmer, who has worked quite a bit on historic preservation in Canby and was a former member of the Heritage and Landmark Commission. So I'll invite Spencer up to to present on the reconnaissance level survey that we recently did in downtown Canby.
Great, thank you. So can I dive in for?
Yes, go for it.
Fantastic. So I wasn't sure quite how this was going to be set up. Let me scroll through. But welcome to the second public meeting for the reconnaissance level survey for downtown Canby. At the first meeting, we presented just kind of what the survey area is and what the level of survey, what the survey level would be. So I'll kind of recap on that, and then we'll go through the findings from the fieldwork from the survey, and then talk a little bit about recommendations at the end coming out of the survey, and then next steps, and then if there's any questions coming out after that. Can you move to the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Jamie.
Okay, sorry. There we go.
Oh, it's okay.
And let me just...
So it's kind of a quick recap for members of the public here. The survey is funded through a certified local government grant from the National Park Service that is passed through the Oregon State Historic Preservation Office. Next slide, please. Thanks.
Yes.
And so also just as a recap, there are two types of surveys, reconnaissance level and intensive. This survey was done at the reconnaissance level, which is focused primarily on architectural information that is observable from the public right-of-way and does not involve deep background research into the individual buildings, which is the intensive level. Next slide, please. So this map gives an overview of which resources had been previously recorded through prior survey work. These were all updated as part of this survey, and resources that had not been previously surveyed had a new form prepared for them as part of this survey. I use the word resources just because we have three different property types within this survey area. We have buildings, we have a park, and we have a structure, the water tower. So resources is used as a catch-all to just group everybody together and talk about them as a single word. The survey area is the dashed black line that wraps the area. The green dots along the north side were from the 2021 survey. The brown dots, which are the majority, are from the 2009 survey. And then there's an orange dot from 1969. That is for demolished resource, but I think that was most everything in there. As part of this too, we went through and cross-checked the locations of all the previous surveys and updated those, as well as the previously surveyed resources that had been demolished. And so those ones we were also able to update some of those, cross-check, make sure they're at the correct location. If they weren't, then we updated them based on historic aerials and Sanborn maps to kind of get all of that in correct locations. Next slide, please. So this map shows the resources that were surveyed. The survey area, again, is a black dashed line. The blue building footprints are the 135 primary resources that were surveyed. The small brown footprints show secondary structures like garages and sheds that are associated with each primary resource. Since the last survey, there were 8 buildings that have been demolished. These, again, were updated in the database, but are not shown on this map. Next slide, please. So this was kind of an overview of the plats that are overlapped by the survey area. The survey area spans 2 plats, with the majority of the resources being within the south portion of Canby's 1870 original town plat. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the resources color-coded by development period. The development periods are established for the city of Canby in your 2020 historic preservation plan. And so as we were looking at and processing the information on the different buildings, one important lens is looking at how many buildings are extant from each of the different development periods to how they tie back to those development periods and can convey the significance and associations from those development periods. It also speaks to sort of overall within the city, the rarity of resources for some development periods too. Typically, the older that the development period is, the fewer resources that are going to be there. So there are 5 buildings from the 1868 to 1892 period. These are shown in pink on the map. They include a mix of commercial buildings along Northwest First Avenue and single-family dwellings. This period encompasses the arrival of the Oregon and California Railroad in 1870 that helped establish Canby as a commercial center, and the filing of the town plat that same year. There are 7 buildings from the 1893 to 1909 period, which is shown in dark blue. This period encompasses the city's incorporation in 1893 and formation of the Clackamas County Fair in 1907, and the fair's move to Canby in 1908. From 1910 to 1940, this period shown in yellow, there are 42 resources remaining within the survey area. This was the second most numerous. This period corresponds with a big jump in the city's population, going from 600 in 1910 to nearly 1,000 by 1940. Most of the development within the survey area, however, occurred during the 1941 to 1976 development period, which is shown in the kind of brick red. This period encompasses the World War II era years and the mid-20th century boom that followed the war. There are 53 resources from this period. They include a mix of commercial and single-family buildings, as well as the park and the water tower. Development in the most recent development period from 1977 to 2024, there are only 20 resources within the survey area from this period, and they convey the continued population growth within the city and increased density within the city core. Next slide, please. So there are a wide variety of architectural styles represented within the survey area. The list to the right of the map highlights the styles having the most representative examples within the survey area. Minimal traditional was the most prominent, followed by craftsman. And the periods, as you see, as we look at these later, you'll see that the periods of national popularity for these styles directly overlaps the time periods where there's the most growth within the city of Canby. Most resources did not have a style and were either vernacular or late 20th century buildings with limited stylistic expression. The vernacular resources have stylistic elements from one or more styles, but in general do not embody a single architectural style. So in the next 5 slides, we'll take a look at some of the examples of the styles having the most examples within the survey area. Next slide, please. So craftsmen, there were 5 examples within the survey area. All are residences. Shown in this slide are 2 examples. This style was widespread from 1905 through the 1930s for residential architecture. It's the first major style originating on the West Coast. Next slide, please. Minimal traditional, there are 8 examples within the survey area. Shown on this slide is one example. The style derives from the Tudor Revival and English cottage styles with a more simplified expression. Next slide, please. Colonial Revival, there are 4 examples within the survey area. Shown on this slide are two examples. The facades are typically symmetrical, and buildings generally utilize muted classical elements in their detailing. Next slide, please. And Tudor Revival, there were 5 examples within the survey area. This style is a loose interpretation of buildings from the late medieval period in England, with the characteristic steeply pitched roofs, front cross gable, and often decorative brickwork or half timbering. Next slide, please. And there are 6 contemporary style examples within the survey area. They're both commercial and residential buildings, which we have commercial at the top and residential, or commercial at the bottom and residential at the top on this slide. The style was popular from the 1950s through 1960s. Exterior finishes often include a mix of contrasting materials and textures, and very characteristic of it is that broad overhanging roof with the exposed purlins. And so these are both actually look like great examples. Next slide, please. So this map shows the eligibility recommendations from the field work. And granted, it's kind of a larger map that's kind of smushed into the presentation to be able to see with the labels that are on there. But the eligible significant are shown as black footprints. So you can see how those are distributed both along Northwest 1st Avenue and then kind of extending back through the survey area, including both older buildings and more recent, as in the bank building over, I forget the address, but kind of the right central portion of the map. Eligible contributing are shown with diagonal hatching. The out-of-period buildings, which have the cross-hatching, were built between 1980 and 2022. And all but 3 of the resources that are identified as eligible significant have been surveyed at the intensive level. So you've really completed intensive level survey for the majority of them. Next slide, please. And so in this slide and the next, it's just kind of a quick, brief mugshots of the intensive or of the eligible significant resources within the survey area. So all of these have been previously surveyed at the intensive level. And from our survey, there were not really any significant changes since that previous survey to these. Next slide, please. And then all of these, except for 3, the ones with the asterisks after them that are in bold, have been surveyed at the intensive level. So you can see the 3 with the asterisks that have not been surveyed at the intensive level and are recommended that be done for those. For the ones that had been previously surveyed, there were not any significant changes since the last survey for any of those. Next slide, please. So part of this was also looking at, is there eligibility for a National Register district or a local historic district? And so the red dashed outline on the slide shows what we were looking at for a potential historic district. And this was kind of taking the whole survey area and trying to get down to where we have a concentration of similar resources, i.e. sort of all commercial or all residential, and where we have a concentration of eligible significant and eligible contributing resources. So those, in sort of the language of a historic district, would translate into contributing resources. The non-contributing, the ones that are shown just as a white footprint, would be non-contributing. That is typically due to the extent of alterations that have occurred to those resources. Not to say that for any of those, the alterations might cover something that at a later date could be removed, and if the original materials were there, that could change the eligibility recommendation on that. But so all of that narrowed down to those 3 blocks that front Northwest 1st. Within that overall red area, there are 21 buildings in this area. Of those 21, 12 are recommended as eligible to contribute. That, however, only gets to 50% contributing within that area. And kind of as context, looking at this through the lens of, is there potential National Register historic district eligibility? The National Park Service typically prefers that eligible historic districts have at least 60% contributing resources. The reason for that is that the idea that you should be able to walk into that historic district as a member of the public and have a clear sense of an understanding of what is significant, what it's working to convey by the physical fabric that exists there. So 60% has been kind of their rough rule of thumb as to where that tips over to being no longer legible. So we weren't hitting 60% with those three half blocks along Northwest First. So we looked at the two at the right, I believe the westernmost two, trying to remember which side is, or easternmost two. And those have, so the two blocks between North First Street and North Holly Street along Northwest First Avenue, there are 16 buildings in there, of which 10 are eligible to contribute. So that gets to 62%. So overall, our thoughts and recommendations relative to National Register eligibility is that it's unlikely, even at those two half blocks, to qualify for National Register eligibility due to the extent of changes. However, a local historic district would be something that would still be possible. You're still over 60% on that. That would, though, require both the support of the Historic Landmarks Commission and the support of the majority of property owners within those two blocks to consent to district listing. So that is an option. In the next couple of slides, we'll look at sort of the role of heritage tourism, financial incentives, what's available, and how does that help relative to the downtown and to historic districts. So I think the local designation would provide protection from demolition. It would require design review, and it would open up some avenues for financial incentives for property owners to be able to do exterior improvements and repairs to their buildings. It also potentially provides a place, an identity as a downtown historic can be, that for heritage tourism and for marketing, that can be marketed as such, and it helps to reinforce the sense of Canby as a destination and its kind of role within the surrounding area. So a lot to consider as you think about that. Next slide, please. So for recommendations, we're generally pretty straightforward. Conducting outreach to those three remaining eligible significant or recommended eligible significant resources to see if they would be interested in having intensive level surveys done for their properties. And then really continuing to support and encourage heritage tourism and participation in the Main Street program. Canby really is a unique and important destination. And so our thoughts on this is that central to this experience for visitors is retaining integrity in the existing buildings and being able to support local owner-operated businesses. Next slide, please. Thanks. So heritage tourism, this from the SHPO, it heritage tourism visitors, from studies they have found, stay longer and spend more than visitors with no interest in historic resources. So the benefit of having historic resources, having a potential local historic district, being able to market that can translate into a tangible benefit for and adjacent kind of surrounding that district as bring in more economic activity for those businesses. Um, the other is heritage resources, particularly in connection with the broader agricultural heritage and neighboring communities, can also provide an important draw for visitors coming into the community. Next slide, please. So, and then as part of the encouraging and supporting property owners in the use of financial incentives that support historic preservation, a big one are the federal historic tax credits. Those are 20% tax credits on eligible expenditures for projects, which can really help. They are, however, only available to National Register listed properties. So that was part of the big hope of looking, can we get to an eligibility for a historic district, which then makes these incentives that much more accessible for property owners within that historic district. So instead, this would be looking at individual resources where property owners have like an eligible significant property, and they know that they're going to be doing some capital improvements to that property, and starting a discussion with HLC and the city on, will they be spending enough, and what would that qualifying look like? What would be the return on that? And, at the end of the day, does it kind of pencil out for them, and what that process would look like? So it's a more complicated process to kind of work through those, and it really benefits from having a property owner who knows that they're planning on doing work and kind of what the amount of that work is going to be, and then being able to kind of sit down and talk through how that translates into a potential project, or if based on the extent of work that they're wanting to do or the type of work that they're wanting to do, you realize that it's just not going to qualify for that type of project. And the biggest thing with the federal historic tax credits is that it's reviewed by both the State Department of the SHPO's office, and then also by the National Park Service. And they're using the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. And so they look at both the exterior changes to the building, and they also look at the interior changes that are occurring as part of the work. So it really ends up being important as part of a project to know what's a character defining feature and space and what isn't, and how is the work that a property owner is proposing going to affect that or not. Within Oregon, since 2018, there have been 34 projects that have used the federal tax credits. They've generated over $270 million in private investment, and nationwide, 17% of projects using this incentive were projects where the total project cost was under $250,000. So on a lot of these incentives, property owners often think that they're going to need to have to spend a lot of money. They will have to spend money, but potentially not as much as they think in order to be able to qualify for that program. There are also competitive grant programs for rehabilitating historic resources, often with matching private funds for private and private-public projects. These include Diamonds in the Rough grant, the Oregon Heritage Grant, the Preserving Oregon Grant, the Oregon Historic Theater Grant, and then this partly to encourage continued participation in the Main Street program. The Main Street program for participating cities also offers the Oregon Main Street Revitalization Grant. So it's trying to look at and corral all those potential different financial incentives and helping to try and connect those with property owners of eligible significant or eligible contributing properties. Definitely at the end of the day, for a property owner doing an application for one of these grants, if they are within a locally designated historic district. That helps them because for the grant entities, they know there's going to be design review at the local level. They know that there's going to be protection from demolition. So in terms of protection, long-term protection of that investment, that is afforded, and that they know that there's sort of interest in and support of historic preservation, that this could translate, any investment could translate into other work for other properties in there. Next slide, please. So next steps, we're at the second public meeting, final public meeting on this. Our next is any edits that come out of this from the commission, from many members of the public, and then being able to get the final report in by June 28th. I know SHPO has been reviewing the database and they've had a few questions, and so we've been working with them to address their questions, and we had, as one example, the water tower and pump house, we'd split those into two separate forms, and they said, no, we'd rather have those merged into one, so that was getting merged together. So I think at this point, are there any questions?
Yea or nay, boys? Questions? That I can think of right now.
Well, and if the commission also wants to, continue to review on your own time, and then if there's any questions or any input that you'd like to provide, you can do so to Tyler. He's at actually the Main Street Conference this week. We are a Main Street community, so some of those grants that you spoke about can be as eligible to apply for because we are a Main Street community. So that is absolutely helpful. Thank you very much for your presentation. And did any questions or anything?
I have one little clarifying one. On the architectural survey data, it's on page 31 of the little handout, under comments of individual buildings, when it says 2024, is that completed projects or ones that have been requested? So for example, under, I know it's 266 Northwest First, that's the old Ladybugs chocolates, it says comment 2024 added awning. So for example, would that be something that has already been completed or something that is like requested, like, hey, heads up, we're going to be doing this?
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
That is as an overall, the comments field, the SHPO directed us and other consultants to use that as a record and notation space for updates from each survey. So typically, each survey would have the year that survey was done, and then you have a colon, and then any additional notes that are in there. And so we use that. So we used 2024 for this survey, and then included any notes that were part of that or sort of pertinent. Typically, those were notes where we were making a change on like some of the materials or style, and then we would make a notation that was changed down there. So I think now jumping back to your question, remember that that the awning was added. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. Yes. Correct. Thank you. That's a long way of answering that.
Well, great. Oh, Ron? Yes, if you just push that button, it will, there you go.
Is anything supposed to be scheduled for demolition in the next few months?
Oh, is any building scheduled for demolition within the next few months? No. Not to my knowledge. I think.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I was just going to say, I don't believe that there's anything located within the downtown core that's scheduled for demolition at all. Some of the only demolition I can think about is the former library building, and that process has been ongoing, where they took off kind of the side and the roof as they're building out. But I don't believe that anything has been scheduled for demolition. Yes, the Canby Herald building, but that doesn't have any sort of date applied to it at this time. The owner is the same owner as the Backstop Bar and Grill building. And so at some point, there are plans to redevelop that, but no, I don't think he's working on that at this time. Thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions, thank you so much, and I'll invite Carol Palmer up.
Because I've been working with Peggy Sigler a lot lately on helping her with her grant projects for the Mark Prairie Historical Society and the restoration of the Mark Prairie Schoolhouse, I'm very attuned to grants now. So I kind of keyed in on something that Spencer brought up about grants, and most of what he was talking about were grants that are limited to National Register properties. But I'll tell you, local register properties are also in Oregon, in many cases, eligible for grants. So we don't have to get to that level of the national in order to get the money. Peggy has been able to raise over $300,000 in grants for that schoolhouse, and it is not a National Register property. It is a county register property. And we were very fortunate in Oregon to have two large granting organizations, Kinsman and Roundhouse. Roundhouse is Gert Boyle, Columbia Sportswear. Her heirs have established something that is strictly for rural Oregon, and they gave quite a bit of money to the Mark Prairie Schoolhouse restoration. So there is value in being locally registered as well, and it still gives us oversight and design review, which is important to preserving those properties. I wanted to talk about what's special about Canby from a historian's perspective. Most towns that you go to that have a historic district are in many cases very monotone. It looks like, for about 20 years, things were really hopping and really going strong, and then it sort of all stopped. And it's almost like, so what happened? Why did everybody stop? Aurora sort of looks like that in many respects. If you've ever been to Oakland, Oregon, man, 1890 to 1910, they were a hot town. And that is just a total brick town, but every building is almost the same. And you know what? They did sort of die after about 1910. The thing about Canby that's great is we have buildings that cover 2 millennia, 3 centuries, and 19 decades. So for almost every period that we have existed as a town, we have examples of properties that tell the story of the town. And the stories are so important, because if it's an old building and it's just an old building, if you don't know those stories, then I think it's endangered. So that is one of the responsibilities I see for this organization, is doing your best to make sure that we keep those buildings that are important to us. And some of the stories, if you just walk down First Street alone, there's, of course, all the feel-good stories, but there's the other stories too that are really interesting. Like on First Street, I can point out where an unsolved murder took place as part of a burglary. I can point out a building where one of the most scandalous affairs that ever occurred in Canby was unearthed because the couple was engaging in a bit of PDA right there in Deadman's Drugstore, now Mattress World. And then, of course, we have the failed bank robbery at what is now Nails to See. So there's some great stories there that I think we're not taking advantage of, and we're not looking at our town through those sort of eyes of thinking about how this tells the story of Canby's development. I wanted to also mention that in this report, of course, what Spencer referred back to was the Canby Historic Preservation Plan. This is an excellent guide. I think that every one of you that is on the commission should have a copy of this. If you don't, you should ask your staff liaison to get one for you. It should be a topic on every agenda that you have to talk about what we're doing, how the projects are coming along. There is a short-term and a long-term planning detail in here of what you could be working on in the projects. And so this to me is absolutely a treasure to have this. Many communities do not have this. And I worry a lot that one of the things that we need to do is make sure that when planning is going on in the city, for right now, I know we've got, I know there's some planning going on at the city for goals for the city council and that sort of thing. I wonder if there's anything in there about historic preservation in those goals. And this group should be making that case that we need to be talking about having those kinds of goals mesh with these. Can't look at Canby just as in silos where these are parks and this is historic preservation and this is, you know, the public works projects. We have to be thinking about things, I think, more laterally and connecting the dots, because that's really a much more efficient way of doing things. So I was really disappointed in the Parks and Rec plan, where I think I read the whole thing and I saw the word history once. We have some amazing parks that have tremendous history, and yet those are all covered in the historic preservation plan, but that wasn't even referenced in the Parks and Rec plan. And I apologize if I missed something in the Parks and Rec plan, but I don't think I did. So that's my big sister telling you what to do speech. I did want to point out a couple of things in the plan that you have in front of you that I thought were just really great, basic 101 stuff, and I know several of you are fairly new. I think on page 4, where they give you the acronyms and the definitions, that is a great page to refer to. I also want to point out this survey work on page 8, where we talk about the previous surveys. There are 12 resources here that they were identified, and I went through it. I marked only 2 are protected. So when you're talking about demolition, those other 10 are fair game for demolition. And so it's really important that we're outreaching to those, that you are outreaching to those property owners to talk about what are the benefits and what can we do to help you. When Spencer was talking about doing the intensive level surveys for those properties that have not had the intensive level surveys yet, we actually, when we did those, we did not get property owner approval. We just decided that it was important to do those. There's a cost to doing it. The city bore part of that cost. We've got a grant from the Certified Local Government Program to do the rest of the surveys, to pay for the rest of the cost. But that's just a really important part of making sure that we understand the full history of the building, not just, you know, what we do with the reconnaissance level survey is really a look at how old is the building and how much historic integrity does it have. The intensive level survey should also get to historic significance. And so there are some properties, quite frankly, in this survey that if we did have intensive level surveys on them, I know we could prove that they were eligible, contributing in terms of historic significance. Historic significance really is sort of a trump card. I think it's, for example, that building that's scheduled to be demolished, the Canby Herald, I can easily make a case for why that is probably one of the top 5 most significant buildings in the development of this community. The Canby Herald as a newspaper, but also its association with one of the most incredible women in this town, and whose name I just now can't remember. Thank you. Anyway, Myra Weston, yes. How could I forget Myra Weston's name? So I also wanted to talk just a little bit about the historical overview. If you go to your historic preservation guide, you will see that same historical overview, but it's more expanded. This is sort of the one in this survey is sort of a compressed one. It is really an excellent job of telling the history of this community and looking at it through in a way that is, I think most, by looking at it at different periods, it's the way to really help to understand how things were working and how things change over time. I think it was well done, and I encourage you all to make sure you're familiar with that as members of the HLC. I'm going through my list here. I also wanted to just commend them for the architectural styles. I think this was a great little guide that really should help you as you think about the buildings in town. I wanted to point out the demolished structures that the ones that were demolished between 2009 and 2021. There's 9 buildings in there, so almost 1 a year we're losing at that time. And so I think it's really important that we stop that trend, that we start keeping some of those buildings that are telling the great story of our community. The integrity matrix on page 17 is absolutely fabulous. This is something that's such a quick reference guide. So if you're looking at a property, this tells you, what's the feature that we're looking at, how intact is it, and how do you grade it because of that. And I think that was it. Let me see if I have anything else here. That was it. So thank you for letting me boss you around.
Thank you so much.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Carol,
Can you
since
turn your
you're-
microphone on?
Since you're the expert. So I like history like you do, and you and I know a lot about Canby. Here's my thing that I think would be helpful, because we know a lot of the landlords that own most of the buildings are getting elderly. What happens when that new generation comes in and buys that building, doesn't care, doesn't want it? What do we do then? Would it be worth to have a meeting once a year and invite downtown business owners, landlords and stuff like that? I don't think they know anything about, tell them what their building is, tell them the grant options and the financial benefits that they have. I know a lot of them don't want to mess with that, but I think it's nice for them to know.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't know. Like Norm Carnegie, look what he owns. He's 84 years old. He might not own those forever. And then what do we do? Talk about demolition.
Yeah. Once the property changes ownership, yeah, it becomes very vulnerable when it passes on. I think that's a great idea. My idea was, and I was supposed to be doing this tomorrow at Chamber, but I have a situation at home that I have a problem with, so I had to back out of that. But was to go before the Chamber luncheon tomorrow and talk about some of the stuff I've talked to you about. We've got this great story to tell, we have these great buildings, and reaching out to the business owners to say, there are things that we can do to build that historic district, to tell those stories, and essentially to help them, and to talk about especially the grants that are available to help with the properties. But I know those business owners are not always the property owners. In fact,
No.
I think in many cases they're not.
Yeah.
Getting a hold of the property owners is tough. It's hard to find those people.
Well, the building that we used to be in, he lived in California,
Yeah.
and he didn't care one iota.
Yeah.
So the one thing I miss, the most important thing I miss, other than the buildings, I miss the elevators that were built into the sidewalks
Oh,
that you could load stuff on, take it downstairs,
yeah.
which would still be used today for a lot of those businesses because the basement goes out to the street. And I miss those, and I wish we could have constructed those in the sidewalks to keep them.
Yeah.
They would have been neat.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank
thank
you,
you so
Karen.
much. And we always appreciate your time here. And for some of our newer members, as I mentioned, Carol Palmer was on our, originally it was the Historic Review Board, and then it moved to the Heritage and Landmark Commission. And she holds a PhD in history. So she is a great, yes, absolutely. She is a great resource and really, walks the walk and talks the talk, and we're lucky to have her here this evening. Thank you also, Spencer, for your presentation. Moving on to the next item, so upcoming Heritage and Landmark Commission meetings. So per the code, the Heritage and Landmark Commission meetings, there needs to be 4 per year. Obviously, at certain times, there's more going on than others, and so sometimes we might have 12 per year, sometimes we might have 4 per year. The next meeting is going to be August 5th, so that, I think at the last meeting, it was discussed that it would be an every other month situation, but so that would mean that we would miss June, and then July occurs right by the 4th of July, and while a lot of people travel, also the Economic Development Department is all hands on deck for the downtown celebration, so we'll miss the July meeting. So August 5th, and one of the things that's really interesting about that meeting is actually the preservation plan that Mrs. Palmer was talking about is going to come back before the Heritage and Landmark Commission as part of the update to the comprehensive plan. So what we need to do is that we'll need to, I'm saying we, because I will be presenting it and you will be listening, but it will be presented and eventually adopted by ordinance by the city council. So we'll first have a public hearing here at the Heritage and Landmark Commission, then that will go before the Planning Commission because Heritage and Landmark is housed within the planning code, and then that will go before the city council to be adopted by ordinance. It was adopted by resolution in 2020 when it was completed, so it was adopted and acknowledged by the city council. This is a little bit more of a formal version, so that it is also then specifically with that chapter 16 code. And it was a recommendation by the Department of Land Conservation and Development that we adopt it in that more formal matter. So you'll see me at your August meeting as well. And then as far as new member recruitment, I'm hoping that Councillor Sassy could maybe give an update on some of the recruitment that's happened, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so last week we had interviews for applicants, and we had two, and they're both here, Hannah Ellison and Ron LeBlanc, correct? Yes. Good, thank you. So they will be joining you next August 5th, so thank you for applying.
And so that brings the total members to 5. We still have 2 open spots. So if anybody knows anybody who's just eager to get involved with historic preservation, you don't have to know anything. You don't have to know everything. You just have to be interested. And one of the other things that I wanted to mention tonight before we go to other items in good of the order that I think kind of bridges the gap between new member recruitment and the good of the order is that the grant that the city applied for this reconnaissance level survey is called the Certified Local Government Grant. The City of Canby is a certified local government, and that's something through the State Historic Preservation Office, or you'll hear it referred to as SHPO. And it is a grant that once you become a certified local government, as long as you're applying for items that they fund, then usually you're awarded that money. And one of the items that we were awarded in addition to the reconnaissance level survey is something called CAMP. And it is actually preservation, it's commission, assistance, and mentoring program where they come out, and it's the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. They actually will come out and provide a training that helps to kind of give some of those foundational items. And I think because we have a relatively new commission, it's going to be a great opportunity to be able to kind of learn some of those foundational pieces. We're also going to invite people from the community. So we'll invite the Historical Society Board, we'll invite the City Council, we'll invite the Planning Commission, because obviously sometimes the Planning Commission sees heritage and landmark items come before them, much like the Preservation Plan ordinance that will be before them in a couple of months. And so that is something you'll have to look for. Some more information Tyler will be sending out, but we're hoping to have that sometime within the summer so that we can help to give more tools and give some more foundation to the work that you guys are doing here. Are there any items for the good of the order?
Does that mean you're going to join the NAPC?
Actually, when you do a camp, anybody that attends that gets an NAPC membership for 1 year. And so, yes, through having them come out, and then kind of we'll see how that goes for future.
It's really good for this group because they have great, you're shaking your head, they have great webinars and seminars that they do, that you can sign up for. And for NAPC members, and since you're on the HLC of an NAPC organization, you would be able to attend those for free. They're very, very informative, super informative.
Yes, and actually when we were speaking with the staff person, and kind of talking through what kinds of opportunities would be best to focus on during camp in Canby, there were a couple where we were like, well, should we do this or should we do that? And they noted that, oh, actually there's a webinar that we can provide that will be free for anybody that attends the camp training, that will be able to then watch that. So the training aspect of camp goes on even further than just that one day. So that is a great point, because I had forgotten that when we met with them. Any other items for the good of the order? And you need to leave a little early. Well, that is the end of the meeting as far as I see it. Welcome, new members. I look forward to having you on the city council agenda to make you official. But thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, commissioners. Have a great evening.
They know what they're getting into, don't they?